Hey y'all, and welcome back to KateMas. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to check out another one of my videos. And today I'm super excited to be sharing today's video, not only because the topic is very fun and interesting, but also it's kicking off a week talking about palettes, and I am so excited. I cannot wait to get into it. We are going to be diving deep into my favorites from the year, but before we get into my palette favorites when it comes to the palettes that I tried in 2020, I do want to take a minute and take a video to talk about the palettes that were an absolute fail for me from 2020. Now, I do want to preface this by saying that as a whole, none of these palettes are absolutely atrocious. Like, I feel like a couple years ago we could do worst of when we're talking about palettes and really talk about some horrible formula, like throughout the palette was just bad. But I feel like we've come a long way in general, like as a makeup community when it comes to palettes, and as a whole they're generally just like really great palettes, and then palettes that are doable, they're workable, they're just not fun to work with, and maybe they just have a couple duds in the palette, that sort of thing. So all these palettes today, they're duds, they're total fails for me when I look back at the year. Like, each one of these I had such a struggle bus with, and I was never fully happy with them. So that's why they landed for the fail, the worst palette of 2020. But like I said, I do want to say that doesn't mean that they're absolutely atrocious and no one can possibly get any looks out of them. They're definitely doable. I've seen a lot of beautiful looks and I can get looks with them, but working with them, either for one reason or another, we'll get into it, but working with them, I do not like working with them, and the formula just does not work for me. So hence why they landed in this video today, which is the worst palettes that I tried in 2020. As I've already said, this week we're gonna have a bunch of videos all about palettes that I tried in 2020, talking about worst, best, absolute favorites, ranking, all that sort of fun thing. So definitely stay tuned. I cannot wait. I've been super excited to share this week's videos because you guys know my love of palettes, and talking about favorite palettes is absolutely fun. But let's first get into talking about the worst palettes of 2020, which is today's video. And let's just go ahead and jump right into it. Okay, surprisingly, I didn't have a bunch of palettes that were absolute duds. I'm not going to be ranking these fails. They're just going to be the fails. We're just going to talk about them, and I'm just going to reach for them out of this little basket that I have them in. So let's get going. The first one we're going to talk about is from Juvia's place, surprisingly, but it is the Violets palette. I tried this towards the beginning of the year, and I feel like I've mentioned it a couple times throughout this year, just talking about how much I do not like this palette. I will say, though, that the shimmers are very pretty, but for me, when it comes to eyeshadow palettes, the mattes are really where I keep my eye on and really determines how much I like a palette. And for me, this palette only has two mattes. One of them is super pale, like a pastel violet, but it's so pale that it's very hard to show up on your skin. And then this darker shade out here was so patchy. It was such a pain to work with. I did not enjoy that shadow. So for me, both of these mattes, while this one isn't terrible, it's just not worth the effort in my opinion. It takes a lot of effort. So for me, with both of these mattes being duds in the palette, that really makes this palette a fail for me. I do think the shimmers are very pretty, but if I can't do anything with the mattes in my crease, what am I going to do with these shimmers? It would make a great companion palette, sure, but when we're talking about a standalone palette, this palette by itself, it was a fail for me from this past year because I did not enjoy working with it. I thought those mattes, both mattes in there were kind of a dud from Juvia's place. Next up, another palette I tried towards the beginning of the year is the LORAC Neon Lights palette. This palette right here I was so excited for because it was LORAC Cosmetics. I love LORAC Cosmetics, and they were doing neons. Like, wow. And around the time I tried this, I had just tried the Glamour Neon pigment, so I had a lot of fun with that. So I was like, oh my goodness, LORAC did neons. LORAC has a great formula. They're going to do neons really well. And I didn't find that to be the case. This blue was very tricky to blend out, and maybe it has something to do with the pressing of, you know, having such intense shades. Maybe they're just difficult to blend out when you press them into a pan. I'm not sure. I mean, neons in general can be tricky to work with, but these neons were specifically tricky. This shade was very tricky to work with. Wherever you put that blue down, it just didn't want to, not only didn't want to move, but it didn't want to mix with any shadows. This row down here, however, was confusing and a bit of a dud. I didn't understand why they put these colors with such beautiful neons. Like, I really struggled when I went to this palette to create fun looks that didn't look kind of odd. I did a 3 looks 1 palette. It was my very first 3 looks 1 palette on my channel, so I guess it's been almost a year of me doing them. I just remember struggling so hard to create looks with this. Also, this kind of this indie shade, this, like, you know, beige, dark beige, it's like, why do you have that color with all of these neon mattes? It was very confusing. The color story is confusing. The shimmers weren't the best in my opinion. They were very soft, satiny, or this one was super chunky and weird. And then these two mattes on the end just didn't make sense. So for me, when I look at this palette, the only shadows that I actually enjoyed working with and that I thought looked relatively pretty were the 3 in the middle. And when we're talking about a big palette like this from LORAC Cosmetics and only 3 shadows that are enjoyable to work with, hence why it was a dud. And also, like I said, I think I've already mentioned, the color story is just very confusing when it comes to getting a neon eyeshadow look. To have all of these shadows down here, It's like, what were they doing? What were they thinking? I don't understand. Next up, I'm kind of surprised and a little sad to put this in my fails, but this is the Midas Cosmetics Artistry Volume 1.2 palette. This is a relatively new try for me, and I had to include it in this video because it was a big dud for me. I struggled to use this. There was a day I did a blue-purple look, and I kind of struggled to get those two to blend and mesh together and also build up because they were very sheer. They were very just like milky in color, and not even like in a pretty pastel way, but in a where's the pigmentation, where's the color sort of way. It's kind of just like there wasn't enough pigment in the formula, so you would use the eyeshadow, but the color would get so scattered and a little bit chalky and patchy on my lid. It was just a big disappointment. Also too, with longevity, with this palette specifically, I know it's really bad longevity because a couple hours after doing a look with this, I was getting significant wear down on the outer corner where I tend to crease on my more hooded eye, and I don't really tend to get a ton of creasing. Like if an eyeshadow palette's going to crease, it's just a little bit, or wear away, it's just a tiny bit, but this was significant and after like 2-3 hours of wearing it. So for all those reasons, I feel like I've already talked this to death because it is more of a newer review for me, so I don't want to go on and on, but I was just kind of disappointed in the formula. I don't know what went wrong, but it just wasn't a hit for me. This green too was very, not just pastel, but also like chalky. I don't know, there was just something about it that I couldn't get it to work for me, and when I tried to build it up and tried to work with it, I felt like that's when I started getting issues of weird lines, weird grabbing in certain areas, and almost like because it's so dry and chalky, it was like soaking into my eye or soaking into my eyeshadow primer, and that was changing the tone and the color of it. It was very odd. I mean, they have two in this collection. I definitely like the darker ones, so keep that in mind. But this lighter version, I just did 3 or 4. I can't even remember now. I did a handful of looks, and I think there was only one of them that I got, and I was like, oh, that's really pretty. I really like how it looks. All the other ones, I had a little issue here or there, or wear time was bad, or something like that. So for all those reasons, I have to put this as one of the worst palettes I tried in 2020. I'm so sorry, Midas. I like the brand. A lot of these brands that I really like, but these are the duds from them, so. Next up, this shouldn't be too surprising, and this palette is put in not just because of the formula is bad, it's mostly due to my disappointment. I feel like that's the biggest reason why it landed in the fails, but this is the Colored Raine Juicy Boost palette. And like I said, the biggest reason why this landed so like smack dab in the fails and wasn't just that palette from the year is because my expectations going into a Colored Raine palette were very high because they've done so many amazing palettes in the past, and then using this palette, it was just like, what went wrong? Like, I don't understand how they released this palette when they have so many awesome palettes that they've released in the past. So that's the biggest reason why it landed in my fail, because I was expecting and hoping and looking forward to great things with this palette because the color story is so pretty and fun. But when I tried to use it, it just didn't work out. Another reason it landed in the fails is because this middle row here just seems so unnecessary. There are so many different shades of pink in here, but all of those pinks, you can use every single one of them on your eye, like a look like this, and it will look like you took a pink shimmer and one pink matte color and just blew it out. Like, there's no depth, there's no intensity. If you try to build it up with intensity or vibrancy in your eye look, it all muddies together very easily and just kind of becomes one. That's a huge disappointment for me because it's such a waste of space when we come to such a large palette to have so many in here that seem unnecessary. I can go on and on. I've done videos, I've yammered on and on all year about this palette, but to close out 2020, I did have to mention it as being a huge disappointment and therefore one of the worst palettes of 2020 that I tried, just because this color story is so pretty, the packaging is so beautiful, and I don't plan to get rid of it because the packaging is beautiful. But when we're talking about like how much I enjoy using this palette, how much I enjoy the looks that I got out of it, not so much. Okay, next up we have the Blush Tribe Laila 2 palette. Now the Blush Tribe is not even a thing anymore, so I feel a little silly putting this in here, but I did try it this year, so I do want to include it. And this palette has such a pretty color story. It's greens. You guys know my love of greens. I really do enjoy a green look mixed with that yellow, giving you that grunge and whatnot. So I was expecting to get a lot of really fun looks with this palette, but the one thing that I definitely got every time I reached for this palette was a struggle bus. Like, every time I used this, I had to spend twice, if not 3 times as long on my makeup to get these colors to show up, and not only show up, but to blend. Now, not to say that they're all chalky and dusty, but when you're working with them, working them into other shadows, they were just very lackluster, and they just kind of wanted to stick in one spot. So as soon as you put one shade down, it didn't really want to move, and then when you tried to blend another shade with it, it really didn't want to move, and it was just a lot of that tug and pull of like, okay, come on, we got to do something. Remember the first time I used it, I was like, I'm going to do a really simple look of just putting like a yellow in my crease, a dark blue on the outer corner, and a shimmer on the lid, and I'll be done. And it looked so bad. I had to keep using other colors in here, a lot of them darker colors, because the yellow was just so pale you couldn't see it, and I just spent so long on my eye look, and it looked like the most basic eye look. And that was like, oh dear, this is my intro to the palette. we'll see how this goes. The shimmers also aren't anything to write home about. They're very like transparent type of, you know, barely there color, just a little bit of shine kind of thing. So that was also a disappointment. So for all those reasons, I just couldn't be bothered with how much I had to struggle to get a nice eye look out of this. So hence why it landed in a fail from this past year. Okay, next up for fails, I have to include this one. I feel so bad because it's a very popular brand, a very popular product, but it was a fail for me. So I have to include it, but it is the GlamLite Ice Cream Dreams palette. And the biggest reason I included this is not only was it a fail on like my expectations when I got this palette, because I had pretty high expectations. I thought the color story looked really cool. I thought the combination of more deeper tones with the pastel tones would just give a lot of creativity for eye looks, and to an extent it does, but the biggest reason why this for me was one of the fails was because I had issues with blending, and I feel like that's just a big kind of like hard stop for me. If I'm working with a palette that I have a difficulty and I have issues with like patching and stuff like that when I go to blend, that's really where I take a pause and I'm like, okay, it's just, I mean, there's so many palettes that I own, there's so many palettes that are, you know, coming out from brands that I love, that I don't have to work and I don't have to finagle and be careful how I blend them. So for me, if a palette is going to be patchy or going to be weird when I go to blend and mesh colors together, that really does put it very down on my list. And so that's the biggest reason why this GlamLite Ice Cream Dreams palette did end up in the fails for me this year, is because there was a couple looks that I did where I was blending shades together and trying to work shades into each other, and either they wouldn't go, they wouldn't mesh well together, or they were kind of patching off. And I did a 3 looks 1 palette with this, and in one of those tutorials you can see the patching issue that I was having trying to combine colors together. So you can check that video out if you want to see exactly which shades were having issues and which of the pastels and whatnot. But that is the biggest reason why it is in my fails. Like I said, I feel kind of bad because I feel like a lot of people like it, and if you're someone who does more simplistic looks when it comes to your eye looks, I don't think you would have a big issue with this palette. But for me, my personal preference when it comes to makeup and what I like to do with my eyes, it just didn't work out. It was too finicky and it was too much of a struggle some days, depending on what shades I decide to pair together, for me to enjoy using it and for me to have a good time using it. Because I feel like, you know, more often than not, I was struggling or fighting to try to blend out a certain spot or get rid of a balding, you know, spot that was going on my eyes. So for those reasons, I had to include it as one of my palette fails for 2020. Okay, this is going to be a very short video, and I'm kind of happy that it's a short video. It's kind of nice to see that for the majority either I had standout awesome palettes that I can't wait to talk to you guys about later this week, or I had palettes that were just very nice, you know, kind of range from being just okay to being really nice, whatnot. But it's nice to see that the majority of the palettes that I had were decent, were nice palettes, and not all of them fails. I think that's really nice to see. But anyway, we're going to talk about the very last one, and this is a SheGlam Seafoam Palette. And I do feel like if you are very, very pale, this palette probably isn't a huge dud for you, but for me, and I do think I'm kind of pale, but I mean, I'm not the palest girl out there. So for me though, with my skin tone, this is a huge dud because these shadows, especially these two, are so hard to get to show up on your eye, and you like try to blend this into a look, it just doesn't show up. Like, I feel like I can barely see that, and I mean, I was building it up with a finger with a lot of pressure to try to get it to show up, and there's just a hint. But as soon as you go to like blend that into an eye look, or you wanting to build that up on your eye, it just doesn't go anywhere. There was one look that I did that I thought was very pretty. It was definitely a very pastel wash of color type of look, but that's not the look I go for every day. So for me, like, I'm not going to put that much effort into getting a color to build up when I can go get like a Give Me Glow pastel blue, and in 2 seconds, like, I have that color that took me like a whole minute of blending and building up to get with this palette. And that's mainly why it's in my fails, because it just takes so much effort to get this color to show up on my eyes. The shimmers also too, they're that Super Shock kind of color pop formula, which isn't my favorite, but also too, they're very sheer. Like, all of these I can swatch them out, and I think, what was it, 1, 2, 3 definitely all look the same. This one it looks similar, but it has a little bit more blue, and then this one looks similar but has a little bit more of a bronze to it. But they're all just extremely just sheer. Let me see if I can show you. Yeah, like, that's it on my hand. I don't think you can even see. If you're someone who likes a wash of color and the sparkle on your eye, you just like a little hint of wet looking sparkle, if you know what I mean. There's no real color, but it is a hint of sparkle, then I think you will like this. But for me, when I use shimmers, I like it to be colorful. I like the color to really pop. And for me to have this wash of color, it just didn't do it for me. And yeah, for all those reasons, that's why this landed as a big fail for me. I feel like there are so many better formulas, better indie brands with better pastel formulas that you can get and not bother. I mean, the plus side with this is it is pretty affordable being SheGlam, but I just feel like you have to work so very hard. And like I said, you could take a Gimme Glow, their pastels that are coming back in 2021, so stay tuned, but you could take 2 of their shadows and get it in like less than a minute. And for me, this took me probably 10 minutes of building up to get this, you know, a similar look. So for all those reasons, this is a fail from 2020. All right, so there we have it. I feel like this is a pretty short and sweet video. I had only 6 palettes to talk about when we're talking about the fail palettes from 2020 that I tried. But like I said, that's kind of a good thing. I think that's awesome to see that brands are improving so much that even if the like formula wasn't outstanding or as a whole, like the color story didn't grab me, they're still really nice palettes that I think people will enjoy. But for me, these 6 that I talked about today just had too many pet peeves for me for them to ever be a favorite. And I should also preface this by saying that these palettes I talk about, even though they were fails for me, most definitely from 2020, that doesn't mean that they are absolutely atrocious and that the formula is unworkable for any person to ever get a good look out of it. I definitely think that people can get good looks out of this, and I know that I can get a good look out of like the Juicy Boost if I wanted to. However, it's still a fail for me because my expectations were so high. I could go on and on explaining my reasons basically, but these are all the fails for me for 2020, and I'm not saying that they are absolute fails that no one can get a good look out of. They just did not work for me, and they were the biggest duds of 2020 for me. So that's going to be the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Per usual, let me know what you guys think down below in the comments, and let me know what your #1 fail from 2020 was. I'd love to know that. If I had to pick just one, I feel like when we're talking about biggest fail that the formula just disappointed me so much would have to be the Laila 2. That one was just such a surprising struggle bus. I could not believe how difficult that palette was to work with. But anyway, I'd love to hear what your #1 fail from 2020 was. And yeah, I cannot wait to look forward to 2021. It's crazy to think that we're getting into 2021, but I am so excited. And as I've already said, this week is going to be full of palette videos. I cannot wait to share with you guys. I'm trying to keep it all under wraps, but it's going to be a ton of fun. So I hope you guys stick around. And yeah, if you want to continue getting daily content from me, I'm over on Instagram. I'm LadyKatie92, and you can check me out over there. I share a lot of different type of content than what I talk about over here, but still all relative to makeup and eyeshadow looks. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up per usual. And yeah, with all that said, I will see you very soon in a very exciting video tomorrow. Bye guys.